The sun was sinking behind the blood-red cliffs of Arizona when Evelyn Mary stood at the edge, her white dress fluttering like a torn flag in the desert wind. Her hands trembled as she held a single eagle feather, a gift once meant to seal a promise that would never be kept. The feather belonged to Cale, the Apache warrior who had looked into her eyes and told her she was brave, but not meant for him. For 3 years, Evelyn had lived near the Apache lands, teaching the children how to read and write in a small wooden schoolhouse by the river. She'd come west after losing everything back east, her parents to fever, her fiancé to war. The mountains gave her peace, and the people gave her purpose. But Cale gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He was different from the others, tall, quiet, with eyes dark as obsidian and a voice that carried both gentleness and command. He had taught her the meanings of the wind and the whispers of coyotes at night. They shared fireside stories, laughter, and long silences that said more than words. She thought their bond was unbreakable until the night she asked him to marry her. Cale had stepped back, his expression unreadable under the moonlight. "Evelyn," he'd said, voice steady but hollow, "you belong to your world, and I to mine. The wind cannot live in the cage of a heart." She had smiled then, but her eyes had broken. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, she hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. The world seemed colorless, like the sun had taken warmth with it when he turned away. Now, at the edge of the canyon, she whispered, "If love is not for me, then let the earth take me back." Below, the river shimmered like a silver serpent. The drop was long mercifully so. She closed her eyes, feeling the rush of air on her face. A single tear fell first, then her foot began to follow. "Evelyn!" The shout came from behind her, breaking through the wind's cry. It was a young Apache girl, Suna, one of her students. She ran barefoot up the rocky slope, her hair whipping wildly. "Don't!" she screamed, reaching for her teacher's arm. Evelyn froze, trembling. Her breath caught. The feather slipped from her hand and spiraled down the canyon, disappearing into the depths below. Suna's eyes filled with tears. "You can't go. He doesn't know your heart." Evelyn fell to her knees, covering her face. "He doesn't want it," she whispered, voice cracking. "He said no? He said I don't belong." Suna knelt beside her, clutching her hand. "Maybe the spirits will change his path. But you must stay alive for them to see." The girl's innocence cut through the fog in Evelyn's mind. The cliff no longer felt like an escape, only an echo of despair. Evelyn wept quietly as the sun disappeared, leaving her in the chill of dusk. By the time they returned to her small cabin near the river, her body was shivering from exhaustion. Suna built a small fire and left her with water and bread. Evelyn sat in silence, staring into the flames. The thought of Cale haunted her, the way his eyes looked when he turned away, the way his voice sounded like both thunder and regret. Outside, the night had deepened. Coyotes howled from the hills, and the wind carried whispers from the Apache camp across the valley. But there was something strange about the sound tonight, men's voices raised in anger. Evelyn stood and moved to the window. In the distance, she saw torches flickering near the tribal grounds. Shadowed figures gathered around the central lodge. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she could feel the tension in the air. She told herself it wasn't her concern, but her heart beat faster all the same. Something had shifted among them. When the first light of dawn crept over the desert the next morning, Evelyn woke to pounding on her door. Suna stood there again, her face pale and tear-streaked. "They've taken Cale," she gasped. Evelyn's heart froze. "Taken him?" Suna nodded, voice trembling. "They say he disrespected the tribe. They chained him inside the old storage cabin by the cliffs. No one is allowed to see him." The world tilted for Evelyn. The man who had rejected her, The man who had saved her from loneliness was now imprisoned by his own people, and somehow, deep inside, she knew the reason had something to do with her. The sun had barely risen when Evelyn rode toward the Apache village, the cold morning air biting her cheeks. Her hands trembled around the reins as she guided her horse through the canyon path, her heart pounding harder than the hooves beneath her. She didn't know what she was going to say or even if she would be allowed near him, but she knew she had to see Cale. The news had spread fast. The Apache tribe had chained their own warrior Cale, son of Chief Nanton, for dishonoring their ways. No one dared to speak of the exact reason aloud, but whispers followed the wind. He turned away a woman's heart. He broke the spirit of one who meant no harm. Evelyn had no doubt. They blamed him for what she had almost done. The trail opened to a wide clearing. Smoke from the morning fires drifted above the huts, and the air smelled of sage and ash. Villagers moved about quietly, but when they saw Evelyn, their chatter stopped. Eyes turned cold. Women drew their children closer. Men paused mid-step, their stares heavy with suspicion. She slowed her horse, her pulse quickening. These were the same people she had taught, laughed with, shared bread with. But now, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. At the far end of the camp stood a small wooden storage cabin near the cliffs, a structure meant for tools and winter grains, not for men. 2 guards stood outside, spears in hand. Evelyn dismounted and approached cautiously. "I wish to see him," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The older guard shook his head. "The council forbids it." He shamed the blood. "I only want to speak." Before she could finish, another voice spoke from behind her. It was Chief Nanton himself, his frame tall, his face carved with years of sun and war. His black hair was streaked with silver, his eyes dark and watchful. "You bring storms, Evelyn Mary," he said quietly. "My son's heart has wandered too close to the wind. You stand between his duty and his freedom." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Please let me see him." Nanton's gaze softened slightly, but his words remained firm. "If you enter, you must understand. His chains are not made only of iron, but of the choices he made." She nodded. "Then let me bear a part of those chains." After a long silence, the chief gestured to the guards. The door was unbarred with a groan of wood and iron. Evelyn stepped inside. The air was cold and dim. Dust floated in slanted beams of sunlight that crept through the cracks. And there, kneeling against the far wall, was Cale. His hands were bound by heavy iron cuffs, chains bolted to the timber post behind him. His dark hair hung loose over his shoulders, his bare chest streaked with dirt and sweat. Yet even in that state, his presence filled the room like the quiet strength of a storm waiting to break. When he looked up, his eyes met hers with something between sorrow and disbelief. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly. Evelyn's voice broke. "They said you disrespected the tribe because of me." Cale's lips twitched into a bitter smile. "They needed a reason to remind me who I am, and who I am not." She stepped closer, her boots scraping the wooden floor. "Cale, I didn't mean to. You meant nothing wrong," he interrupted. "But when you stood on that cliff, you carried both our names to the edge. They think I dishonored the spirit by letting you fall into despair." Her eyes filled with tears. "I only wanted your heart." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "My heart was already yours, Evelyn. That's what they can't forgive." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with grief and unspoken longing. The sound of chains shifting echoed softly. Evelyn knelt before him, reaching out, her fingertips brushing the cold iron at his wrists. "There must be a way," she whispered, "to make them see what's true." Cale shook his head slowly. "Truth doesn't live in their eyes anymore. It lives in the silence we keep." She felt her breath hitch. Then I'll share your silence." A faint, almost broken smile crossed his face. "You would sit in chains for me?" "I already wear them," she said quietly, placing a hand over her heart. The door creaked open behind her. The guards gave a warning glance. Time was short. Evelyn rose slowly, her heart torn in two. "I'll come back," she said. "I don't care what they say. You saved me once, Cale. Let me save you now." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "If you forgive me, Evelyn, they will not understand. But maybe the spirits will." She paused at the door, sunlight spilling across her face. "Then let the spirits listen." Outside, the wind carried her tears away while behind her, Cale sat in darkness, the sound of his chains echoing softly like a heartbeat against the wooden walls. That night, the Apache camp was alive with the crackle of flames and the low murmur of voices. The council fire had been lit at the heart of the village, a circle of glowing embers, surrounded by men and women who carried centuries of tradition in their eyes. Evelyn stood at the edge of the gathering, her hands clenched together, her pulse echoing in her ears. She had come to speak for Cale, but among these people, an outsider's voice was rarely welcome. Cale sat nearby, bound in thick leather cords, his wrists still bruised from the iron chains. His head was lifted high despite his weariness. Around him stood elders, painted warriors, and Chief Nanton, whose face was a mask of dignity and pain. The firelight painted everyone in flickering gold. Sparks rose into the night sky, vanishing into the stars. Nanton stepped forward, raising a staff decorated with eagle feathers. "Tonight we speak of the one who has broken balance," he said, his deep voice commanding silence. Cale, my son, turned away from his people's path. He allowed his heart to be taken by a woman not of the tribe. And because of that, the spirits grew angry. The woman's sorrow brought death near the cliffs. Such dishonor stains the ground. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak, but the weight of their eyes pinned her in place. Cale's voice broke the quiet. "Father, I have fought for this tribe since I could hold a bow. I have never disobeyed your word. But the spirits do not curse love, they curse fear." The words drew gasps. Nanton's jaw stiffened. "And fear you brought, my son. When the white woman wept for you, our people saw weakness. They saw a warrior who could not keep the wind from his heart." Cale met his father's gaze. "You taught me the wind cannot be owned. Then why must I chain my soul to silence?" The chief's eyes glimmered with both anger and sorrow. "Because you were born to carry our ways. You cannot love her and still belong here." At that, Evelyn stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "Then let your anger fall on me," she said, her pale face glowing in the firelight. "I was the one who lost hope. I stood at the edge of that cliff, not Cale. If guilt is to be carried, it is mine alone." All heads turned toward her. The silence was so deep she could hear her own heart beating. An old woman, draped in deer hides, rose slowly from the circle. Her name was Atsa, the tribe's spiritual keeper. "You speak boldly, white woman," she said in a raspy voice, "but you do not know what your love costs. Our people remember the wounds your kind gave us. You bring both light and shadow." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I do not come as their kind. I come as myself, the one who was saved by your people, the one who was taught to listen to the earth. And by that earth, I swear I never meant to shame your son." Atsa studied her closely, then turned to Nanton. "Perhaps the spirits test us. Perhaps they wish to see if love can exist without pride." Nanton hesitated. The fire snapped between them, casting long shadows across his weathered face. Finally, he spoke. "The council will decide. Until dawn, Cale remains bound. If the signs speak against him, he will be banished beyond the canyon." A cold shiver ran through Evelyn. Banishment meant death. The wild beyond was unforgiving, no tribe, no shelter, no belonging. She fell to her knees. "Please, Chief Nanton," she pleaded. "If he must suffer, then let me share his punishment." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Cale's head jerked up, his eyes wide with pain. "Evelyn, no." But she pressed on, tears shining like glass. "You say his heart brought dishonor. Then mine must bear it too. If love is a curse, let it fall on both of us." The chief regarded her for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned to the fire, casting a handful of white sage into the flames. Smoke curled upward, twisting like a serpent into the night sky. "The spirits will answer at dawn," he said finally. "Until then, no one speaks to the prisoner." The crowd began to disperse, murmuring prayers and suspicions. Evelyn remained kneeling by the fire long after they had gone, the warmth fading from her skin. Cale was led away by 2 guards, his eyes locked on hers for a final moment before darkness swallowed him again. The desert wind rose around her, carrying the scent of burning sage and sorrow. She whispered to the night, her voice cracking under the weight of hope, "Let dawn bring mercy, not loss." The night bled slowly into dawn, and with it came a stillness that weighed on every soul in the Apache camp. The council fire had burned low, its embers now just faint orange breaths beneath the ash. The wind carried whispers of fear and hope, twisting through the lodges like invisible serpents. Evelyn hadn't slept. She sat outside her small cabin, her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the pale light creep over the horizon. Her heart felt like a drum, steady but hollow. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cale's face behind the flames, proud, broken, and chained. When the first golden rays touched the cliffs, a distant horn echoed from the village center. The call of judgment. Evelyn stood, her body trembling. She brushed the dust from her dress and made her way toward the fire circle. The people had already gathered, men, women, and children standing in silence, the air thick with anticipation. At the far end stood Chief Nanton and the elder Atza, each facing east, their shadows stretching long across the sand. Cale was brought out from the cabin between 2 guards. His wrists were still bound, but his chains had been replaced with a leather strap. The morning light glinted off the tribal jewelry at his neck, the turquoise stones catching hints of the rising sun. Despite his fatigue, he looked every bit the warrior he was, muscular, calm, and unbroken. Evelyn's breath caught when their eyes met. There was no anger in him, only quiet understanding, as if he had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. Atza stepped forward, her weathered hands holding a bowl of sacred herbs. She tossed them into the fire, and white smoke rose into the air. "The spirits will speak through the signs of dawn," she said. "If the smoke drifts east, he is forgiven. If it turns west, the wind rejects him." The crowd held its breath. Evelyn closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. The smoke swirled upward in thick, twisting ribbons, hesitating, dancing, and then began to drift slowly toward the west. A low murmur rippled through the people. Someone whispered, "The spirits reject him." Nanton bowed his head in sorrow. "The signs have spoken. Cale must be banished beyond the canyon by sunset." Evelyn gasped. "No, please." She stumbled forward, her voice breaking. "You said the spirits would judge, but what if this is a test of mercy, not rejection?" Nanton's voice was heavy. "Mercy has no place when balance is broken." Cale turned to her, his voice soft but steady. "Evelyn, don't fight them. Let it be." Her tears fell freely now. "I can't. I won't watch you disappear because of me." The old woman Atza lifted her gaze toward the rising sun. "Sometimes the spirits speak through smoke, and sometimes through hearts. If you believe mercy still lives, then prove it." Evelyn blinked through her tears. "How?" Atsa nodded toward the cliff beyond the camp, the same one where Evelyn had once stood ready to end her life. Go there. The place where sorrow once called to you. If you can stand there again, not with despair but with forgiveness, perhaps the spirits will see your heart. The crowd murmured, uncertain. Even Nanton looked puzzled, but Atsa's authority as a spiritual keeper was ancient and unquestioned. Evelyn took a shaky breath and nodded. I'll go. Cale's jaw tightened. Evelyn, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she said, cutting him off. You were willing to face exile for love. Let me face the same for forgiveness. The guards released Cale for a moment under the chief's command, and together, surrounded by curious onlookers, Evelyn and Cale walked toward the cliff trail. The wind grew stronger as they climbed, carrying the scent of sage and dust. When they reached the top, the same canyon yawned before them, deep and silent. Evelyn's heart pounded, but this time there was no despair in her chest. Only resolve. She turned to Cale. I came here to die once because you said no. But now I understand. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. You were afraid of hurting your people. Cale's eyes softened. I was afraid of losing you to their hate. Evelyn smiled faintly through her tears. Then lose me to love instead. She stepped to the edge of the cliff and lifted her hands toward the rising sun. Her voice trembled as she spoke into the wind. Spirits of the canyon, I forgive him. I forgive myself. Let peace return. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wind shifted. The smoke from the camp below, once drifting west, suddenly curved eastward, swirling toward the morning light. A gasp rose from the villagers below. Cale stared in disbelief. The wind! Evelyn turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. They've heard. Down below, Atsa raised her arms toward the sky. The spirits have changed their path. She cried. The man is forgiven. Nanton bowed his head, humbled. The crowd erupted in prayer and awe. Cale fell to his knees before Evelyn, his eyes full of emotion. You've done what I never could. She knelt with him, taking his chained hands in hers. No, Cale, we did it together. The morning sun broke fully over the canyon, washing them both in light, the chains between them glowing like threads of gold, no longer symbols of bondage, but of love reborn. The fire crackled in the center of the Apache camp, its light painting the faces of men and women who had once called Cale brother and now judged him in silence. The wind carried whispers through the canyon, stirring the embers into restless sparks that danced like ghosts between them. Cale stood bare-chested, his long black hair loose and tangled, the tribal jewelry at his neck gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Across from him, Chief Nanton sat in solemn judgment, his old eyes unreadable. Around them, a circle of warriors formed, their faces lit by the red glow. Evelyn stood outside that circle, wrapped in a worn blanket, her hands trembling. Her heart pounded like the drums that echoed faintly from the distant, steady, low, and ancient. Cale did not look at her. He could not. He had been given a second chance by the spirits and by her, but that mercy came with a price. He had to face his people. Cale, Chief Nanton began, his voice deep and gravelly, you walked away from your blood. You rode with men who hunted your own kind. And now you return with a white woman by your side. A ripple went through the crowd. The words were heavy, sharp as flint. Cale's fists clenched. I did what I had to do to survive, he answered. When they chained me, when they burned my brother's name from my tongue, I forgot who I was. But she, he stopped himself, his throat tightening. She reminded me. The chief leaned forward, his shadow long across the dirt. And now you remember? Cale's dark eyes burned. Every scar, every death, every betrayal. But I also remember what it means to stand for something, to love, to protect. He turned slightly, his gaze brushing Evelyn for the first time. She looked fragile under the starlight, yet unbroken. One of the younger warriors, Tosa, stepped forward. He brings a white woman into our sacred ground. His soul is tainted. He speaks of love while our people bleed. The crowd murmured agreement. Evelyn's breath caught in her chest, but she did not look away. She knew this was Cale's battle, his fire to walk through. Cale stepped forward, closer to the flames. The heat touched his skin, and for a moment he imagined it purifying him. "You say I am tainted," he said, his voice steady. "But what is purity if it is bound by hatred? This woman Evelyn saved me when your own would have killed me. She gave me water when I was dying. She listened when I spoke in a language she didn't understand. Is that impurity?" Silence. The flames snapped. Chief Manton studied him for a long while, then spoke softly, "Words are wind. Cale, fire tells the truth." Two warriors stepped forward with burning torches and thrust them into a wide circle of dry sage and thorn. The fire erupted, forming a ring around Cale. The tribe began to chant a low, haunting rhythm that echoed through the night. "This is your trial," the chief said. "If your heart is true, the fire will not consume you." Evelyn gasped, stepping forward. "No, he's done enough." A warrior held her back. Her voice broke against the chanting, lost to the rhythm of drums. Cale met her gaze through the wall of flame. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the roar. "Whatever happens, don't look away." He stepped into the fire. The heat was blinding. The smoke clawed at his lungs, searing his skin. Pain screamed through every scar, every memory. He stumbled once but did not fall. He saw flashes his brother's laughter, the chains, the white soldiers, Evelyn's trembling hands. Then, in the center of the circle, something shifted. The flames parted slightly, bending as if to let him through. The chanting grew louder, stronger. Cale stood tall, his chest heaving, the fire reflecting off his eyes like molten gold. When he stepped out the other side, the crowd fell silent. The fire still burned, but Cale's skin was untouched, his spirit unbroken. Chief Manton rose slowly, his expression one of awe and sorrow. "The spirits have spoken," he said. "Cale of the river blood returns to us." Evelyn broke free and ran to him. She didn't care about the stares or the whispers. She threw her arms around him, and for the first time in years, Cale let himself breathe, truly breathe. But deep inside, he knew this was not the end. The white men who had once enslaved him would come looking. The fire may have spared him, but another was already burning on the horizon. The morning after the fire trial, the Apache Valley awoke in uneasy silence. The embers from the sacred flame still smoldered, filling the air with the bitter scent of burnt sage. Cale sat at the edge of the canyon, his bare chest wrapped with a thin band of leather across a fresh burn on his shoulder. His long black hair moved with the wind, and his dark eyes stared into the vastness of the desert. Evelyn approached quietly, the morning sun painting gold into her hair. She carried a wooden bowl filled with herbs and cool water. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said softly. "You haven't healed." Cale didn't turn. "The land heals me faster than rest." His voice was quiet, roughened by the smoke and pain of the night before. "I just needed to see the sunrise, to make sure I'm still here." Evelyn knelt beside him, dipping a cloth into the water and pressing it gently against his wound. "You're still here," she whispered, her eyes shimmering. "And I thank God for that." For a long time, neither spoke. The desert stretched before them, endless, golden, and quiet. But beneath that peace, a dark shadow was moving. In the distance, Cale saw a faint line of dust rising beyond the horizon. His breath tightened. He knew that shape riders. Not Apache, soldiers. He stood abruptly. "They found us," Evelyn followed his gaze, squinting. Who? The ones who took me, Cale said, his tone hardening. The white soldiers. They must have followed the river trail. Her face went pale. Cale, they'll kill you. And if they see me here, they'll use you, Cale cut in. They'll twist your mercy into betrayal. He turned and strode toward the camp, his body tense. Evelyn followed, fear pressing into her chest with every step. When they reached the main circle, Chief Nanton was already there, his old eyes fixed on the horizon. The warriors were gathering their weapons bows, rifles, and blades polished in the dawnlight. Cale approached the chief. We can't fight them head on. They'll have rifles, maybe cannons. Nanton's gaze didn't waver. We do not run. I'm not saying we run, Cale replied, but we protect our people. We hide the women and children in the ravine, send scouts through the rocks. The chief hesitated, then nodded. You will lead them? Cale looked at Evelyn. She stood beside him, her hands trembling, but her eyes were strong. I'll lead them, he said. The camp erupted into movement. Warriors shouted orders, mothers gathered their children, and the rhythm of drums began again, a low, steady beat of defiance. Cale turned to Evelyn. You'll stay in the canyon, he said firmly. It's safe there. No, she said, her voice breaking. I won't hide while they fight for me. This isn't your battle. She met his gaze, her chin lifting. You became their enemy because of me. I won't leave you to face that alone. Cale stared at her for a long moment. The wind carried the sound of hoofbeats now closer, echoing through the canyons. Finally, he reached out and brushed a lock of hair from her face. Then stay behind me. If anything happens, run to the ravine and don't look back. I won't run, she whispered. The first gunshot cracked across the valley. Dust burst from a rock near the camp. Chaos followed. Warriors shouted, arrows flew, and rifles thundered. The white soldiers charged through the open plain, their horses kicking up a storm of sand and smoke. Cale grabbed his bow and fired in one smooth motion, striking a soldier off his horse. The warriors around him roared, returning fire. Evelyn ducked behind a fallen wagon, clutching her heart as bullets whistled past. A soldier spotted her and raised his gun. Cale's eyes caught the glint of metal. He sprinted, his bare feet pounding the dirt, and tackled her just as the shot rang out. The bullet grazed his arm, blood splattering across her sleeve. Cale, she cried, pressing her hands to the wound. He winced but kept his grip on his knife. Stay down. Through the smoke, more soldiers appeared. The tribe was outnumbered 3-1. Still, they fought like wolves cornered by fire. Then, from the canyon walls, a deep sound echoed, a war cry, ancient and thunderous. From behind the ridge, Apache reinforcements charged in, their horses painted, their spears raised. The tide turned. Cale stood, his breath ragged, watching as the enemy began to retreat. The desert fell back into silence, broken only by the moans of the wounded. Evelyn rose beside him, tears streaking her dusty face. It's over, she whispered. Cale shook his head slowly. No, he said. This is just the beginning. He looked out toward the horizon, where the smoke still rose, a warning, not a victory. The world they knew was burning, and forgiveness, no matter how pure, would not be enough to save it. The sun sank low over the canyon, casting long golden streaks across the wounded land. Smoke still rose from the battlefield below, curling like ghosts into the reddening sky. The clash of rifles and arrows had fallen silent. Only the wind spoke now, whispering through the sage and over the broken earth. Cale stood on the ridge, breathing hard, his chest streaked with blood and ash. His tribal jewelry glinted faintly in the dying light, and his long black hair, matted with sweat, clung to his shoulders. Around him, The Apache warriors moved slowly among their fallen brothers, sons, fathers. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and grief. Evelyn climbed the hill toward him, her dress torn, her hands trembling. She stopped when she reached him, afraid to speak. His eyes were distant, dark, as if he were staring into something only he could see. "It's over," she whispered. "They're gone." Cale didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, his breath uneven. "No," he said softly. "Nothing's ever over. Not when blood stains the ground." She stepped closer. "You saved them. You saved your people." He turned toward her then, his expression raw and haunted. "At what cost, Evelyn?" "I led them into a fire. I watched brothers die because I brought you here. Because I couldn't let go." Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't you dare blame yourself. They followed you because they believed in you." He shook his head slowly, pain shadowing his face. "I was once their pride. Now I'm the scar they'll carry." She reached for him, touching his arm gently. "Cale, listen to me. You were chained and broken by men who saw you as less than human. You fought your way back not for revenge but for forgiveness. Don't let this destroy you." He looked down at her hand on his skin, the contrast of pale against bronze. The fire in his chest softened. But deep inside, another conflict burned between two worlds that could never truly meet. As twilight deepened, Chief Nanton approached slowly, leaning on his carved staff. His voice was weary but strong. "The battle is done," he said, "but the soldiers will return. They always do." He studied Cale for a long moment. "You fought with honor. The spirits have seen it." Cale bowed his head. "I brought danger to our people." "You brought truth," Nanton replied. "And truth is always dangerous." His old eyes shifted toward Evelyn. "The woman's heart is pure. She gave you life when you had none left. That is not a curse, it is balance." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Chief Nanton," she said quietly, "I never meant to bring harm to your people. I only wanted him to live." The old chief nodded slowly. "And so he does. But both of you must choose your path now, together or apart." Cale's eyes met hers again. The choice hung between them like smoke. He knew what it meant. If he stayed, she could never belong. If he left, she would be alone in a world that would never understand what had happened here. The silence stretched until the sound of a single drum echoed from the camp below, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The tribe was preparing a ritual fire, not for punishment this time, but for cleansing. That night, as stars scattered across the sky, Cale and Evelyn stood before the flames together. The firelight painted her face in gold and crimson, her tears glimmering like glass. "This fire," Cale said quietly, "is where our people forgive what cannot be undone." She looked up at him. "Then forgive yourself, Cale. You deserve peace." He hesitated, then reached into the pouch around his neck and pulled out a small turquoise pendant, the symbol of his tribe. He pressed it into her hand. "This belongs to the one who carries my spirit," he said softly. "You gave me life when I wished for death. You saw a man when the world saw a savage." Her lip trembled. "Cale, what are you saying?" "I must lead them," he whispered. "There's another battle coming, one not fought with weapons, but with survival. My people need me here." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "And what about me?" Cale smiled faintly, a sad, quiet smile. "You'll always be in every sunrise that touches this valley." She stepped forward, her hands cupping his face. "Then let this be our forgiveness." Their lips met, gentle, trembling, and filled with everything they could never say. The fire flared brighter, as if the earth itself bore witness to their hearts. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn whispered, "I'll wait for you, Cale." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then I will find you in this life or the next." As dawn broke, She watched him walk away into the mist, the rising sun lighting his figure like a spirit of flame and strength. The drums faded, and only the whisper of the wind remained. And in that wind she heard it his voice, calm and eternal. Forgiveness is not the end. It is where love begins.